Bevis, welcome to CoP26 in Glasgow. It's great to have you here. Antonio Guterres announced that it's the time for make or break. What does that mean to you? What does it mean to your organization, your sector?
The sort of emergency and the urgency with which we need to act means in the finance sector is, if we believe that we need a net zero society, a net zero economy, we have to have a net zero financial system. And at the minute, we don't regulate the financial system for net zero. So we should have mandatory net zero targets, we should have mandatory transition plans, and then there's lots of supporting things that we need to do common across the globe, such as how we measure the carbon impact of financial portfolios, how we report on it, etc., etc. We need common agreements to standardise those things. So that's the kind of definitive action and decisioning we need. This can't be something we continue to creep along in addressing.
And what will help you to achieve that, especially the next 12 months? What are you going to be doing to make that happen?
Yeah. Well, I mean, ultimately, I'm talking about a change in the regulatory framework and the red lines that are drawn around banking, and consumer pressure has a huge impact on public opinion and political opinion and how we then change banking regulation. But ultimately, we at COP have just announced our own net zero target, which is 2035, and that's the most ambitious target yet set, to my knowledge, by any bank. And that is set whilst we still plan to grow in the years to come, and we plan to play a role in a just transition, because it isn't just about net zero. We need to try and use this as the next industrial revolution and try and take people out of poverty and create greater equity. So we will increase, for example, the number of low-income households we finance in the countries we provide mortgages, because we want to then help them decarbonise their homes and become more energy efficient. But ultimately, it's the most ambitious target, and that's from a bank that has never invested in fossil fuels or high-emitting industries, has led the way internationally on developing a methodology to publish the carbon footprint of your financial portfolio, and we've published it publicly for 3 years, so we know our baseline, and we also publish the data confidence intervals to say, well, this isn't a perfect science, no one's got this really nailed down and all the answers, but we're starting from that place with a very low carbon intensity portfolio, and we think we can only get there by 2035, playing a meaningful role in that just transition and so on. So ultimately, it does, in our minds, mean a lot of the things we're hearing are quite hollow pledges around 2050, 2045. How realistic is it if you've got huge interests in fossil fuels and in aviation, in automotive, in intensive agriculture?
And could you talk a little bit about the next 12 months? Because also our global community is keen to hold accountable leaders, and it'd be good to hear about some of the initiatives that you're working on.
So the net zero target we've set is aligned to Science-Based Target Initiative's framework and 1.5 degrees C. And so having done all the internal work to set that target, we will get the Science-Based Target Initiative to verify that. We're also going to make it part of our annual auditing, and so our auditors will look at the progress we've made. And we've publicly said we'll have a check-in in 2025 to calibrate, well, where do we think we are now? What success have we had in trying to reduce the carbon footprint of a lot of the sectors we lend to, and so on. We will also continue to push for wider change in the financial sector, and with a lot of partners we work with and like-minded banks worldwide that are part of something called the Global Alliance for Banking on Values. The next 12 months, really need to push for this much higher level of ambition.
And we've known about climate change for a long time. Scientists have been talking about as far back as I can remember, going back even to the 60s. 61 years, not a lot has happened. What do you think has been the bottleneck, and what's the big challenge or opportunity here that we can see this transition happen in our lifetime?
I mean, we're at COP26, right? COP was born out of the Earth Summit in '92. So, since we started to recognise climate change as an issue, even in the last 30 years, it's been a very slow process to get here. The barriers that get in the way of that are huge and wide varying. There's huge vested interests from people making a lot of money out of the businesses and the systems that are currently in place. There's a lot of political fear about the transition and so on. But we also need real vision. We have to come together and understand that a future society needs to be kind of reinvented around the Sustainable Development Goals, because quite rightly a lot of people in the world want what the wealthy Western economies have had, and therefore a lot of the battles and negotiations around climate change are going to be difficult if we're not being sort of more giving and more generous and supporting some of the communities that will be worst affected by climate change, but supporting them in a transition as well.
Bevis, it's great to hear about your aspirations. Can you explain to me what gets you out of bed in the morning and what keeps you awake at night?
Well, I've worked for nearly 25 years in sustainability in different guises, and I just think what we're doing now has never been more relevant, and I do think this is a time of real change, and I get hugely excited by the next generation that I see taking with real passion action and then demanding change, and that's why a lot of us do what we do and want to try and make a meaningful impact in proving there can be a different kind of bank and a different kind of system. Ultimately though, I feel a huge responsibility with that as well, and I wouldn't say I necessarily lose sleep, but there's a huge responsibility on us and like-minded people within the finance sector to prove there is a real alternative, and not that you can just finance renewable energy, organic farming, we've done that for years, but to prove you can run a bank in a profitable way, you can do it in an appropriate way, protecting people from fraud and cybersecurity and all the expectations there are of a bank, and that's quite something, but that's what we're trying to do, that's what we're trying to prove, that there is a real alternative.
You had a bit of an unusual career path into banking. Can you just give us a little bit of the background of what you've been doing the last 25 years?
Sure. I mean, I began my career actually in the recycling industry, and part of my job then was to try and attract private sector investment into the UK recycling industry when it was just really in its early days and needed to grow very fast. And I suppose I became aware of some of the systemic issues we've touched on then, because I would introduce fast-growing businesses to banks who were very reluctant really to engage because there were vested interests with their existing customer base in traditional waste management and landfill. But also someone once said to me, the faster you fill a landfill site, the better your return on investment. So for me, having worked at a grassroots level in environmentalism, this just was a mind-expanding moment that sort of said, okay, I need to get up there, I need to affect this systems change, I need to follow the money. And I'm very fortunate because I've worked for a number of organisations, and including in the conservation movement, which is central to net zero. Because I guess having had that 25-year experience, what I'm trying to affect now is to create a nature-connected economy. That's ultimately how we need to reinvent things. We need to see ourselves as part of a natural system, not separated and only taking from it.
You mentioned a few words there that are rarely spoken by leaders with substance and determination and grit behind it, the way that you have done. You mentioned resilience, a just transition, adaptation. Could you expand on either of those words and add a little bit of context to them? Sure.
I mean, a just transition, means not just achieving a low carbon economy, but it means achieving a fairer economy and taking everybody with us on the journey to net zero. Financial institutions could deploy what I call tricks and flicks. You can move certain things you finance off your own balance sheet to make your targets look better. You could choose to say, I'm not going to finance the least energy efficient homes in this country because actually that's not helping with my net zero target. Whereas what we should be doing is saying, well, actually we have real issues with fuel poverty. And we should be thinking about how do we make finance affordable for people to green their homes and address fuel poverty and create greater prosperity. And that's just one example. But a just transition means aligning social and environmental outcomes and ideally thinking about the Sustainable Development Goals more holistically. Because for all the talk about net zero, I'm convinced we're on a journey to realise we're just in the foothills of understanding the transition we have to make as a society to one that is much more holistically fair, equitable and sustainable. And resilience is also a word that's quite rare
but I do know that the COP26 team in particular are keen to be looking into resilience more and adaptation. Is there anything that you could discuss on those subjects?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're already in an era where climate change impacts are with us now, and it won't solely be climate change impacts, biodiversity loss, ocean pollution from plastics, and these are going to really come home to roost. So we have to be thinking now, what investments are we making to make us more resilient to climate change? So one of the things we've been involved in an organisation is trying to look at nature-based investment. How can we invest in landscape-scale restoration of the natural environment in order to provide us with that resilience and safeguard future economic outcomes? So one of the first projects to have raised money that we've announced is a natural flood management project. So this is people who have the responsibility to protect against flood risk, it's insurance companies, it's various organisations paying money in order to then engage landowners in changing the use of that land with tree planting, with allowing natural flooding, with meandering rivers and so on. And so that's a huge part of the adaptation we need to make in order to be resilient to the effects that we're already experiencing, but which will inevitably get worse.
Bevis, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Pleasure. Thank you.